All right, good morning everyone, or good afternoon. Looks like we've got a pretty good group assembled, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Russell Cook, and thank you for joining us for the October 8th monthly meeting of Nevada's on-exchange insurance carriers. This is a big one, as this is our last monthly meeting before the start of open enrollment, and we have a lot of exciting news to share with you. A few procedural items before we get started. We are, as always, recording this presentation so that you can refer back to it later. That may be of particular interest because we're going to be given a live demo of our Carrier Connector casework tool at the end of the presentation, so you're welcome to refer back to that. We will, as always, send out a link to the video along with a link to the presentation materials, the slides themselves, after the meeting. We'll post both of those to our website, to the carrier transition page. Also, we'd appreciate it if everyone could please keep your phones on mute unless you'd like to ask a question. And of course, if you'd like to ask a question but you don't want to do so by voice, you can submit a question to me using the chat feature that's available through your Zoom meeting controls. And please be aware that you can send a private chat that will only be visible to me, or you can send a group chat that will be visible to everyone in the group along with your name that'll be associated with the chat question there. So we will go ahead and get started, as we always do, with introductions. We have on the phone with us Heather Korbulik, our Executive Director. We also have Ryan High, our Chief Operations Officer. Myself, Russell Cook, I'm the Information Systems Manager. We also have Eric Watt, Senior Project Manager for the transition, and Jamie Sawyer, our Plan Certification Manager. And I also forgot to list on here today, we are joined by Athena Cox. She is our Lead Quality Assurance Officer, and she is going to be spearheading the casework team using the Carrier Connector system that we're going to demo a little bit later in the presentation. So thanks, Athena, for joining us. Looking at today's agenda, there aren't too many items, but there's a lot of information in each one. We're going to start, as we always do, with progress since last meeting. We're going to give you an update on the consumer data migration. We received our second payload from CMS last week. We're also going to discuss an item that has been previously discussed, but as we're getting closer to open enrollment, we wanted to recap our strategy for handling terms, ads, and SEP enrollments after 1025. And then we're going to conclude today's presentation with a live demo of Carrier Connect, which is our SSHIX replacement. That's our casework system. And we're also going to give a high-level overview of the timeline for the Carrier Connector rollout. So let's go ahead and dive into the progress since last meeting. First, we have a couple of administrative items which are very important to the success of the transition. Last month, we received our approval from CMS for our Authority to Connect, or ATC, to the Federal Data Services Hub. So that was the last milestone in terms of CMS approval that we needed to accomplish before we had the green light to go live. And so that's a big milestone for us. And an associated milestone is that we also received around the same time in late September approval from the IRS's Office of Safeguards to utilize their income and family size verification, or IFSV service, as well as their renewal re-verification, or RRV service. These are critical for eligibility verification, and the RRV service in particular is also required to process renewals, which has already begun. We'll give you a little bit more of an update in a moment, but both of those are key accomplishments for us. So in terms of federal approval, those were the last two big hurdles to clear. So we are looking good as we begin the auto renewal job and head into open enrollment. An update regarding some metrics on the consumer data migration. As of October 7th, we pulled the report yesterday morning, 10,190 households have claimed their migrated accounts on Nevada HealthLink. That represents 23%, or nearly a quarter, of all migrated consumers. So while we still have a long way to go, we're quite thrilled with that level of engagement thus far, because there's really not much to do on the platform other than claim your user account and perhaps set up a designation if you have not done so before. So we're really, really pleased with that level of engagement. And then, as I mentioned above, we have begun this week the renewal re-verification process for migrated consumers. And this process plays out over a couple of weeks. The first thing we do is we send a batch file of all our migrated consumers to the RRV service, and then after we get the responses back from them, we are able to go through those cases one by one and process and redetermine their eligibility for renewal into coverage for 2020. So good progress there. We're right on schedule with the migration and right on schedule with the beginning of the renewal re-verification job as well. Next, a more detailed update regarding that consumer data migration. As I'm sure you're aware, we received our first migration back on 8/15, and that provided a starting point for us in terms of reaching out to our migrated consumers, sending them invitations to claim their migrated accounts, et cetera. But we knew that that data was just going to represent a snapshot in time, and that there were going to be some changes that occurred in between 8/15 and October 1st. In particular, we were looking at adding up dependents, other account maintenance, life changes that may have been reported to policies. We were looking for terminations or cancellations, and we were also looking for new SEP enrollments occurring between 8/15 and 10/1. So we did receive the catch-up migration payload from CMS last week on October 1st. And the total number of applications imported from that payload this time around was 42,333. And the total number of enrollments that were imported was 65,563. So the numbers are a little bit smaller than what we received in August. And looking at trends from previous years, it's pretty typical to see that scale of an erosion and decline in enrollment month over month during this time period in the third and fourth quarters of the year. So not at all unusual, but it does mean that the catch-up payload contained 569 fewer enrollments, that is 569 fewer individuals receiving coverage than did the initial consumer migration payload that we received on 8/15. So what does that mean in terms of the impact on the migration? Well, one thing it means is that consumers who were canceled or termed between 8/15 and 10/1 will not be included in the auto renewal job. And conversely, dependents who are added or new SEP enrollments that were submitted during that time period, those will be included in the auto renewal job. And so last time, a couple weeks after we received the 8/15 migration, after we completed our data analysis, identified anomalies, et cetera, we had sent out to you all a migration report. And we do have the next round of the migration report. Get Insured provided that to us yesterday on 10/7. I have some analysis to do on that report, just some high-level analysis, and then filtering that out by HIOS ID. And we also want to cross-reference that to some of the reports, the monthly reports that we get from CMS, et cetera. But assuming everything looks good, and at first glance, it looks great. It looks like we're right on. We will distribute that the catch-up migration report to you all by tomorrow, by 10/9. The methodology is going to be the same as last time. We're going to use the SFTP accounts that you've been using for EDI testing. That seemed to work well. Everybody was able to access those. And because that's a nice secure means of distributing those, we were going to use that same methodology this time. And one last note, because we've received quite a number of inquiries from a number of carriers about this, yes, the catch-up migration report will contain auto renewal status, which is the consent for auto renewal. So by looking at that column and seeing whether it's true or false, that will give you an indication of whether or not this consumer is going to be considered for inclusion in the auto renewal job. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be auto renewed. There are a number of eligibility-related reasons why a consumer who had provided consent for auto renewal might not actually be included in that auto renewal job, but it at least represents their consent, and in terms of any targeted messaging that you all need to provide, that'll give you an indication of who's going to be included in that job and who is going to not be included on that job, and it's going to have to go online during OEP and actively shop for 2020 coverage. So I'm going to pause right there. I've been talking a lot and haven't heard anything from the audience, but are there any questions regarding the data migration or the data migration report before we move on? And again, you can use either chat or you can jump in and submit a question by voice. All right, hearing nothing and seeing nothing, I'm going to move on, but of course, you can always submit questions to our project manager, the transition project manager, Eric Watt. His email was included earlier in the presentation, and then it's also included again on the last slide, on the Q&A slide. So the next topic, again, is something we've been discussing for a while now. We've also had individual discussions with a number of carriers. But the question came up recently regarding, what are we going to do if the last scheduled catch-up migration from healthcare.gov is scheduled for the 25th of October. And the reason we chose that date is because we didn't want to be doing imports during open enrollment. We just thought that posed too great of a risk in terms of the impact on the system. And we also didn't want to schedule the last import too close to open enrollment. Typically, it's taken us 2 to 3 days to analyze the data, identify and resolve any discrepancies, et cetera. So that's how we arrived at October 25th. So that's the last scheduled catch-up migration from healthcare.gov. And because we began processing renewal re-verifications, the auto-renewal job this week, the 1025 migration is intended only to capture new SEP enrollments occurring between 10/1 and 1025. If we were going to try and capture changes that had occurred to enrollments or terminations, cancellations, that could potentially conflict with the results of the auto renewal job. So that's a cleanup effort that we're going to be working on after the fact. Point being, we're only going to have data from CMS that represents activity through healthcare.gov up through the 25th of October. So as a result, we're requesting assistance from carriers to provide targeted messaging to consumers who submit SEP enrollments or add dependents through healthcare.gov after 1025. These consumers are going to need to actively shop during OEP to make sure that they have continuous coverage for all household members in 2020. These SEP enrollments or these dependents that are added during the month of October are not going to be included in the auto renewal job. So again, we're going to have to reach out to them, message them on the imperative of coming online during OEP and making sure either that they have enrolled actively in coverage for 2020 or that they have added their dependent to their 2020 policy and recalculated the eligibility, and of course that'll trigger an 834 to you all to make sure that the systems stay in sync and that you have the dependent added to the 2020 policy as well. So the adding of dependents and the SEP enrollments are pretty straightforward. We just need to make sure that those consumers get enrolled. But we are also working on a contingency plan to deal with terms that occur after 1025. And really that's terms or cancellation. So any policies that are terminated, rendered no longer active during this interim time period, we are working on a contingency plan so that even if these consumers were renewed as part of the auto renewal job, that we are at a minimum able to message them, let them know what happened, and give them the option to disenroll from that 2020 policy that was recalculated. Typically, if they were canceled, if they canceled their own policy, we would guess they wouldn't want to renew. But if they were terminated, we may want to give them the opportunity to get current in their payments. Anyway, that's a contingency plan that we're working on, and we will, of course, keep you posted. As I mentioned earlier, we would really appreciate your assistance in this coordinated effort. I know we've discussed this in particular with a couple of carriers, but a couple of you, we haven't discussed this in quite such detail. So if you have any questions regarding the assistance that we're requesting to provide targeted messaging to these impacted consumers, please reach out to us, send Eric an email, and we'll get back to you ASAP. Let me see here. I got a question by chat regarding the migration report. Catch-up migration report, is it an info-only file? I'm not 100% sure what you mean by info-only, but it's going to be a spreadsheet that's in an identical format to the one that we sent out at the beginning of September. So there will be columns for the unique person identifier. There's going to be a first name and last name of the consumer. There's going to be a plan ID, and there's going to be a policy ID. The policy ID is going to be the unique identifier of the enrollment. And then, as I mentioned, we're also going to include data fields not only for consent for auto renewal, but there's an additional consent for consumers who have submitted a financial application. They've requested subsidy assistance. They are also given the option to provide consent to re-verify income eligibility. That's too commonly as tax consent. So there's going to be one column for each of those in there. So I hope that answers your question. It's going to be a spreadsheet file. You can open it up and read it in Excel. You can import it into Access. You should be able to import it. And the idea was that you could use either the unique personal identifier or else the policy ID to do a join against the data that's in your database to verify the accuracy and the completeness of the migration. The first round went really well. I believe we were able to resolve all of the issues that were reported by carriers. It's my understanding that we were 100% accurate, save for the changes that occurred in the time lag between 8:15 and when we actually sent out the report and you all had an opportunity to look through it. So we're hoping that this second round will be of assistance to you in identifying those changes that occurred between 8:15 and 10:01. But of course, it's a snapshot in time. The clock is always ticking. And even between last week on the 1st of October and today, there will have been some changes which will likely be reflected in your system, which will not be reflected in that spreadsheet because it is a snapshot of time. So again, that's part of why we're requesting your assistance with the kind of the cleanup effort after we receive the final transfer on 10/25. So Jackie, I hope that answers your question, but if not, please feel free to submit a follow-up question, or you can send me an email afterwards. I'd be happy to provide more detail. And again, those reports should be delivered by tomorrow, and I will, as I did last time, send an email to let you know when it's been delivered and to also provide additional detail about the data that's contained in the report. So I hope that helps. All right, now we get to the fun part. We've never gotten to do anything like this for you in the past, and we've been telling you for months about the SSHIX replacement system that we're building, but today we actually have something to show you here. We've mentioned in the past that we are working on not only a SSHIX replacement system, but also a system to support the reconciliation process. What we're going to be showing you today is really limited to the casework side of the house. We realized that we had about an extra 2 months to get the reconciliation functionality up and running because we're not actually going to generate the first discrepancy report until January. But because we're going to need the casework functionality up and running on November 1st, we have prioritized that set of functionality, and that's what we're going to be demoing for you today. But the reconciliation side will be following close behind, and we should have a comparable update for you during next month's November monthly carrier meeting. So the objectives for today's demo, we wanted to provide a high-level overview of case management workflow. We're going to show some very, very basic examples today, but they should be indicative of the fact that we have all of the essential functions in place and that we are able to create and manage cases in collaboration with insurance carriers effectively as of today. Now, carrier access is, of course, going to be limited to cases affiliated with their respective carrier organizations. So we'll show you some of the security controls that we put in place to make sure that you're only seeing the cases that belong to your particular carrier organization. And we're also going to show some ways that you guys can collaborate on case-based communication between yourselves and between our quality assurance team. And then we're going to demonstrate a very simple but powerful example of automated notification when a case status changes. In particular, we're going to show the priority level today. When that changes from a level 2 to a level 1, we're going to get an automated notification. And I did want to mention before we get in here that what you're going to see today is pretty basic. We've been working very hard to get the essential building blocks in place, but the user interface and in particular the custom data fields that are going to be required to make sure that we're capturing all the same data as the SSHIX system are still in progress, and we're going to be working really hard this week and next week to make sure that we get those additional features implemented, both polishing up the user interface as well as implementing those custom data fields. Now, before we dive into the demo, I got a question here by chat that I wanted to address real quick. Is there a date when we expect to send the passive renewal? There is not a hard and fast date. We were expecting the renewal files to be sent between about the 25th of October and the 31st of October. So we are expecting those to be sent prior to the start of open enrollment. It will be contingent upon the exact duration of the auto-renewal job. Again, we started with the renewal re-verification, and then once we receive all those results back from CMS, we will be able to begin processing them through the state-based exchange platform so that we can re-verify eligibility and create those renewal enrollments. But we're essentially expecting those to go out during the last week of October. So I hope that answers your question. If you need more detail, I'd be happy to put you in touch, Benjamin, with the Get Insured team and see if they can shed some more light. But several carriers have raised that question over the last couple weeks, and that's the most recent information that we have from Get Insured, is that those are going to come at the end of the job. The exact duration of the job is going to depend upon not only when we get the results for RRV back from CMS, but also on any anomalies that are encountered during the actual batch renewal job itself. And then after that's completed successfully, we'll send those your way, but you should expect to receive those prior to the start of OEP, i.e. before November 1st. And again, please let me know if you'd like additional detail, Ben. I don't know that I have much more for you right now, but please send me an email or send Eric an email, and we'll make sure to follow up with Get Insured and get you the information you're looking for. All right. Apparently I'm getting a little excited for the demo here. We had a request for me to slow down a little bit, so I will certainly work.
I was better.
Okay, so let's jump into the live demo. And I don't mean for this to be a smart-ass response, but when we post these videos, it may seem like a silly suggestion, but you can actually slow down the speed, play it back at 75% speed on YouTube, and that may be of help. I apologize if it's hard to understand me, but again, we're really excited to get to this demo. So I will do my best to tap the brakes a little bit for the duration of the presentation. So during the demo today, I'm going to be role-playing 3 different user roles. The first user role that I'm going to show you is what's going to be happening on our side within the SSHIX quality assurance team. So this is the basic Salesforce user interface. And this is a little bit different than the interface that's going to be available to carriers. We have a bit more functionality available to us than carriers do as well. So I'm going to start by creating a couple of new cases using this interface, and I'm going to assign one case to a fictional carrier. We call them Carrier 1 in here. And then I'm going to create a second case, and I'm going to assign it to Carrier number 2. And then I'm going to switch over to the portal that we've created for Carrier Connector, which is what carriers are going to use to access this data and collaborate on casework resolution. And I'll show you, I'll log in as the first carrier. We'll see that we can only see the one case. We'll switch over, we'll log in as the second carrier, and then we'll do a little bit more to actually work that case and simulate something like a workflow that would occur once we get this thing up and running in production. So I'm going to start by creating a new case here. And each case has to be associated with an individual contact. And we have a number of contacts. These represent the consumers, and each one of them is already affiliated with a particular carrier. You can see some of these are affiliated with Carrier 1, and Karen here is affiliated with Carrier 2. So we're going to select Brittany because this particular case, the carrier name that's associated with this case, this is test carrier number 1. Now, when we get this up and running in production, we will, of course, have created representative carrier accounts for each one of your organizations. And as we provide access to your personnel, those accounts will be associated with that carrier organization. But it's this designation of a carrier at the level of the case that's going to provide us with the security that we need to ensure that carrier personnel can only access the cases that belong to their carrier organization. And I'm just going to create a very basic case here, just enough to kind of show you some of the functionality. We have a default status of new. For case origin, we're going to mark this as having originated through our Get Insured call center. And then one of the required fields here, and this is a customization that we made, is that every one of these cases needs to be assigned either a level 2 or a level 1 priority. Level 2, of course, needs to be resolved within 15 days. Level 1 needs to be resolved either far more urgent, they need to be resolved within 72 hours. So our default here is level 2, and that's going to be fine for this one. And I'm going to put a quick subject in here. Let's say maybe the consumer isn't receiving their invoices in the mail. Again, there are, as I mentioned in the previous slide before we switched over to the demo, there are a number of custom data fields that we are still working to implement. You may have noticed right away, for instance, that we don't have a category and a subcategory the way that CMS's SSHIX system does. Part of the reason why we haven't implemented that particular feature yet is because we received a lot of information from carriers. Some reported that there weren't enough categories and subcategories, it wasn't fine-grained enough. Some reported that there were far too many categories and that they didn't seem applicable to the actual use cases. So part of what we want to use the rest of October for is to work with carriers to make sure that we've implemented a categorization system that makes sense to you all and that is, most importantly, of use to you all in terms of triaging and perhaps assigning internally based upon the category and the subcategory of the case. So that's a to be continued right there. But for the purposes of today's demo, the most important custom feature I wanted to show you relates to this priority, level 1 or level 2. So I'm going to go ahead and save this case. We can see right here that the case was created. We can see some details here. Now, this is a little bit different from the user interface that carriers are going to see because we're using the out-of-the-box Salesforce platform, whereas the portal that you're going to be using has been kind of custom built for you. But the essential data elements are the same. We have a feed here that shows kind of an audit record of all the actions that have occurred. We have details on the contact here, and then we have some basic high-level details on the case. And one thing I wanted to point out is that over here we have this area for case team. And you can see that it has been automatically assigned to the Carrier 1 case team, and that's a result of having assigned this particular case to Carrier 1, to test Carrier 1. And that's going to help us, this carrier team assignment is going to help us down the road when it's time to send out automated email notifications by assigning this case to a team of individuals rather than just a single individual explicitly assigning ownership to a single individual within a carrier organization. That's going to allow us to send email notifications to all of the caseworkers within a carrier organization rather than just to the individual owner of a case, let's say. So I'm going to close this out. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to do a little refresh, make sure I can see the case we just created. There it is. And I'm going to create a second case. This time, I'm going to choose a consumer who's affiliated with carrier number 2, and I'm going to associate this case with carrier number 2. And again, that's so that we can accomplish that security feature of limiting access only to those cases that belong to your particular carrier organization. This one, again, came through the call center. We'll call this a level 2. And let's say that this particular consumer, maybe we need to take a look at this consumer's payment history. Maybe they are claiming they paid their bills, the carrier's claiming they didn't, and so we want to get to the bottom of this. So we'll put this in here as consumer payment history. We'll click Save, and we can see that this time, the case team that was assigned automatically by a business rule that runs in the background when a case is created assigned this to Carrier 2 case team. And again, that's going to be of great help down the line when we get around to generating automated email notifications. We can see that we have a different contact here, some basic details about the contact, and when we go back here to our list of cases, we can see both of them laid out before us here. So now I'm going to jump over to the portal here for Carrier Connector. Now we're using a sandbox environment for today's demo, and what that means is this isn't the actual production environment. It's kind of a test environment, a playpen that we set up so that we can create fictional cases and move them back and forth, and we're going to use a similar environment for training in UAT later in the month. But the reason I mention that is because the address up here looks a little funky. It's got the name of the sandbox, and it's got a reference to a test server in here. When this rolls out, the production URL is going to be nevadahealthlink.force.com /carrier connector. So that was about as simple as we could get it. We have to use the force.com, but it'll at least be branded with Nevada Health Link, and then you'll have a unique URL that you can use to come and visit. So I'm going to log in first as the Carrier One. Carrier personnel are called partner users, so I call this one Carrier One partner user. And we're going to log in to this portal here. And on the home page, we get a list of all open cases by default. There are a number of different views that we can choose here, but the default that we've chosen is all open cases. And so we can see a case number, we can see information related to the contact, and if we click and drill in here, we can see the same details related to this case that I was viewing through the Salesforce portal. So we've got some information on the contact, we've got some additional information on the case, we can see the priority, the origin, we can see the subject, and we can see, of course, the date and time that it was opened. And then we can also see over here a feed of all of the activity. This is the audit trail for all of the activity that's occurred. And that applies both to actions that we take on our side within the quality assurance team, as well as actions that you take on your side. Those are visible to both sides so that we have transparent insight into the work history for this particular case. But what we're not seeing is we're not seeing the other case that we created, the one that belongs to Karen. That one was assigned to Carrier 2. So we've got Karen Allen over here, and this one is assigned to Carrier 2. But we are not seeing this particular case show up in the menu for this Carrier 1 user. And of course, that's by design. I did want to mention while we're in here also that although this looks pretty straightforward, it is a fully functional user portal. There are account maintenance features. You can edit your profile. Typically, we will set this up for you when you submit your request to create a new user account, but you can upload a picture if you like, and you can modify your information in here. You also have an inbox for platform-based messaging. There's nothing in here yet, but we can set up automated business rules that deliver messages to your inbox. And then, of course, you can log out, and that's what we're going to do now. Because we're going to switch over and log in as the second carrier. Now the look and feel is exactly the same, but we notice right away that we're seeing one and only one case here, and it's the one that we had assigned to Carrier 2. I'm going to pause real quick because I did get a question here regarding a user manual. Is there a user manual for the Carrier connector? Yes, there will be a user manual. We plan to deliver that by the end of the month, hopefully by the last week of the month, but it is something that we are working on right now. I'm going to talk a bit more about the rollout timeline after we conclude the demo, but just to give you to jump ahead a bit, sorry, I'm trying to read the chat at the same time here. We are going to be sending out a survey this week to carriers to ask them about desired features and confirming some assumptions that we had about how we had interpreted the workflow as it exists in the SSHIX system. And then the results of those are going to be fed back into the actual design of the platform. So we were wanting to hold off on finalizing the user manual until we had all of those features in place. But yes, absolutely, it's something we're working on. We've already begun work on the user manual, and we will be not only providing a user manual prior to the start of OEP, but as we evolve this tool over the next several months, over the next year, to get it really dialed in, we will be, of course, issuing revised versions of the user manuals as we go. Let me pause here, though. I want to get this question here. So the question is a great one. For the carrier view, we only see a case number and a name. Will there also be an exchange member ID listed so that we are not potentially seeing multiple members with the same similar names? Yes, absolutely. Among the custom data fields that we're going to be adding to the case object are application ID, consumer ID, as well as policy ID. I forget exactly what the custom data fields are that the SSHIX system captured. But yes, absolutely. That's at the top of the list of the user user interface enhancements that we're going to be working on over the next week or two. And I also wanted to mention that there's a really nifty sort of automatic feature in the gosh, where is it? That Salesforce automatically reviews based upon associations with existing consumers. It looks for duplicates, both for duplicate consumers as well as duplicate case records. So that's part of one of the nice features about not just typing in a person's name as the SSHIX system does, but we actually have a database relationship created between this case and this particular individual, so that we can see right away that this consumer only has one case open, and it's very easy to see all of the cases that they have open so that we can manually see if this is potentially a duplicate of any cases. But if we try and create a new case that looks similar to Salesforce, it does some nice validations for us to make sure that we aren't creating any duplicates on our side. So the bulk of the validation that you asked about in terms of making sure that we're not seeing multiple members with the same or similar names, we're going to be responsible for that on our side. So by the time it trickles down on the carrier side, you should not be seeing duplicate cases referencing duplicate individuals with similar names, but maybe not exactly the same name. The contact validation looks not only at the name, but also the carrier affiliation, the phone number, email address, if we decide to put that in there, that sort of thing. So yes, absolutely, we will be getting validation for duplication based not only on the contact details, but also some of the additional custom data fields that we're going to be adding to the case itself, including member ID, policy ID, etc. Okay, so where did I leave off? Okay, so back in the carrier connector here, we have a case here that's been assigned to this fictional carrier number 2. And right now it's showing up, the case owner is myself, Russell Cook. I'm the one that created it over in Salesforce. And then we have assigned it to the carrier in a general sense based upon the carrier name, but it has not yet been claimed by a particular individual within that carrier organization. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to explicitly change the owner of this case to myself. Now, this is a little bit clunky. This is one of the areas that we're working on enhancing right now. Rather than requiring, the case owner being assigned as the person who created the case, we're working on developing workflow queues so that when we create a new case, it automatically goes into an unclaimed cases queue for carriers, and we're thinking that that might be a really good widget to show on the dashboard, so that when you log into your home page, the first thing you're presented with is a list of unclaimed cases. We're also working on a couple of dashboard widgets that will provide an immediate indication of the outstanding level 1 cases, which have not yet been resolved, and in particular, any cases where the deadline is less than 24 hours out, regardless of whether they're level 1 or level 2. So those would be visible to all the carrier personnel within the organization. If, for instance, somebody was working a level 2 case and the deadline was approaching and they happen to be out of the office, another person would see that case as coming up quick on the deadline, and they could then claim it themselves, take it across the finish line, and then assign it back to SSHIX. So we have claimed the case, and I mentioned the queues that we're working on to kind of refine the case assignment automation. But one of the things I wanted to show you, if we go back to the home page here, we're seeing a little widget over here that we weren't seeing when we first called My Cases. And so that shows all of the cases that are assigned to this particular user as the case owner. So where we'd like to go with this on the dashboard is that, we're providing this list of unclaimed cases. We're also showing the current open active cases that are being worked by this particular caseworker. And then, like I said, we'll put a couple of gauges or some little dashboard widgets on here to really call out those most urgent cases, the level 1 cases that are unresolved, as well as any cases that are within, a predetermined time period of their deadline. And by the way, the deadline itself is another custom data element that we're going to be adding to the case. And we're going to be putting logic in there so that it recognizes a priority change from level 2 to level 1 or vice versa, and automatically updates the deadline accordingly in the background. And then, of course, that deadline will feed into the logic that populates the dashboard items and the So all that's going to be coming quick within the next couple weeks now that we have kind of these basic building blocks in place. So I'm going to go in here to this particular case, and let's say that I've actually worked this one a little bit, and I want to report back to the QA team in the SSHIX in our office. Let's say that we looked this up and the last payment received from consumer was, let's say, their April 2019 premium. We're going to go ahead and share that. And if I jump back over to the SSHIX portal here, and I refresh my page here, I should see in my feed here that the partner user from Carrier 2 let us know that the last payment received from consumer was for the April 2019 premium. So that's great. So we're going to thank them for the update, and obviously we would have our own workflow in here. If that's sufficient to close out the case, then we would do so. If not, we may need to go back and forth a little bit. But the point is, although this is a very simple example, it's an example nonetheless of how we can communicate and collaborate within the confines of this initial case and keep everything nice and clean. We can, if we want to, we can upload documents if that would help, if we have supporting documents, maybe a screenshot, something like that. So we get a lot of rich functionality out of the box from Salesforce that we think is going to be of great assistance to us in resolving these consumer complaints here. Let's see, we have another question here. Will there be a hard stop or prompt in the system to ensure that identifying information, i.e. member ID number for the consumer, is in the case file? I'm not sure I understand the question. Let me read that again. Oh, I see. So will the identifying information for the consumer be a for the case? Yes, absolutely. Each case must be associated with a distinct consumer, and within, we're still looking at, from a security standpoint, whether it would be preferable to put unique identifiers such as a member ID to associate those with the contact or with the case. I'm thinking it would be better to associate them with the case because there are use cases we've identified where multiple carriers, perhaps a health and a dental carrier, would need to access the same contact information, so the phone number, the name of the consumer, that sort of thing. But we wouldn't want them to be able to access the unique policy or member ID information for the respective enrollments, right? We wouldn't want the health carrier seeing information related to the dental enrollment, that sort of thing. So because of that, we're thinking that it would be better to associate those fields with the case. But yes, absolutely. Once we add those custom fields to the case, those will become required fields, just as the priority level that I showed you before. And yes, absolutely, we will have reports. The question was if you can pull or export reports from the carrier connector. Yes. We are in the process of enabling that functionality, so you will be able to pull reports from the carrier connector. At the simplest level, you'll be able to pull a report based upon the contents of a particular list view that you see, and then you'll have the opportunity to modify the filter criteria and basically adjust these list views so that they're showing exactly what you want, and then export a report in spreadsheet format. Now, as far as a bit more sophisticated reports like aging reports, that sort of thing are concerned, we're working on implementing those not only for visibility on a dashboard level, but also to allow you to download the contents of those reports. And just to kind of wrap this around to my comment earlier about the surveys that we're going to be sending out, we're also going to be soliciting information about what types of reports would be useful or required by carriers. Again, there's only so much functionality that we're kind of able to suss out of the HIX system because we were only granted read-only access to it. It looked to us like the system generated some type of, I'm not using the right name, but it was something along the lines of a disposition report for a particular case. We are going to require something similar, both at the consumer level as well as at the case level, so that we can generate packets for appeals hearings. So that'll only be a hop, skip, and a jump away from generating something similar to a disposition report for carriers, if desired or required. But again, we were hoping to solicit information, feedback from you all about exactly what you needed so that we could get something implemented and then allow you guys to take a look at it later on in the month and actually provide us some feedback. We are doing all of the development and administration for this product ourselves in-house, so we hope to maintain a high level of responsiveness even after open enrollment starts and well into next year until we get this thing dialed in just the way that it needs to be. Excuse me. Okay, so where did I leave off here? Okay, so I mentioned in the objectives that one of the features that we wanted to show was to do with automated email notifications. Across the board, this seemed to be the biggest complaint when we talked to carriers about pain points in the HIX system. If a caseworker at CMS has to escalate the priority level of a case from level 2 to level 1, obviously that has a significant impact on the deadline. You may have had 2 weeks to resolve a case, now you've got 3 days. But the problem was that there was no automated notifications triggered. It was incumbent upon carriers to log in and proactively check the status of these cases to make sure that the priority level didn't change. So what I wanted to show you here, and again, we're going to stick with Carrier 2 for the moment. I'm going to switch over to a tool called Yachtmail. This is something that we use a lot in testing to set up dummy email accounts so that we can access emails that were actually sent to them. And so right now, in our inbox, we had our initial invitation when we created the user account, and then a couple of minutes ago, we actually got a notification that I had added a comment to the post that the carrier personnel had made regarding the last payment that was received from consumers. Now, I don't know whether or not it's going to be particularly useful to get email notifications for every little comment that occurs in the system. We want to strike the right balance so that notifications that show up in your inbox are meaningful and they get your attention, and that we're not sending so many of them to you that it just becomes a blur. So that's part of the refinement that we're going to be working on over the next couple weeks. And again, one of the questions in the survey is in relation to which events, which types of changes are you guys going to want email notifications for? If we can find a one-size-fits-all solution for all carriers, that would be great, but it's certainly possible that we could provide some degree of configurability either on the user account level or on the carrier organization level so that you all can have a bit more fine-grained of control over what types of events are producing triggered notifications and which types are not. So now that I've showed you the inbox, I'm going to switch back over to the Salesforce side. This is our side on the administrative side. And let's say that in the course of working this case, I don't know, maybe the consumer needed to have emergency surgery, and the hospital is telling them that they don't have an active policy, so hey, we need to light a fire under this and get this resolved real quick. All we need to do on our end to trigger this notification is go in here and change a level 2 priority to a level 1 priority and click Save. And when we go back over to the inbox for this particular user, we see a notification. Now this is dead simple. I mean, we're going to be working on kind of cleaning these up a little bit, but it's a perfect proof of concept for the fact that we're communicating this essential information almost instantaneously after that change occurred. And we can apply the same model to any type of change, any type of new record creation, any action that we take that involves an insert or an update in the database. We can attach a workflow automation item to so that it sends a triggered email notification, perhaps a triggered inbox notification, so that you all can keep on top of these urgent issues. And then you may notice that there's a link in the email. Because we're logged in over here still as Carrier 2, we can click on that link and it'll take us right to the detail page for that particular case. If we were not logged in, it would take us to the login page, and then after we log in, it would redirect us right to this detail page. So that's about it for what we wanted to demonstrate today. Again, we've definitely got a long way to go in terms of the customer features, but we think we have a very solid foundation upon which to build these customizations and really tailor this to your needs. We had a question by chat, which is how do we request access for new carriers for the carrier connector? And that is a perfect segue into our last slide here, which is the timeline for the carrier connector rollout. As I mentioned previously, this week, which is the 7th to the 11th, we're going to be distributing surveys to carriers regarding desired features and functionality. So we talked about reports, we talked about trigger notifications, we talked about pain points with the SSHIX system, and we're also going to be asking about wish list features, whether it's workflow automation, whether it's additional data elements that are not captured in the SSHIX system, or whether it's modifications to existing features such as the category and subcategory menus. Beginning next week, from the 14th to the 18th, Athena Cox, she's our lead quality assurance officer, and she's the head of our quality assurance team, is going to reach out to you, your carrier organizations directly to distribute the carrier connector access forms. So we'll be sending those to the lead contacts that Eric identified several months ago. Please feel free to distribute those internally as necessary and return those to us. And let's see, and we'll put information about quotas in those requests, and we are limited in the number of licenses that we have. We're exploring solutions to try and increase the number of licenses by going with a lower cost option. We're just not 100% sure as of today whether the lower cost license option is going to provide all the features that we need, but that's something we should have resolved by next week, and again, we'll be able to provide you with some information about those quotas when Athena sends out those emails. The following week, the 21st, going all the way through the end of the month, we are going to be providing carriers with access to a sandbox environment similar to what we viewed during today's demo for training and user acceptance testing. Now, we're going to shoot to have that rolled out by the 21st, but it may be the 22nd, it may be the 23rd. It just depends upon how much in the way of changes we accumulate through these surveys and through our conversations with carriers, and how long it takes us to get that stuff implemented. But at this point in time, I think we have a pretty good idea of what you all are looking for, and I'm pretty confident that it'll be the 21st or the 22nd when we're able to actually open up that environment. That'll give you at least a week, possibly more, to play around. We can create cases and then to you. We are working on, Athena and I are working on developing essentially a test script so that we can rehearse some various types of scenarios so that you all get a chance to try out the different types of workflow automation that we're implementing. And in particular, so that you can see kind of the breadth of the automated notifications that are going to be generated by the system and make sure that's all to your liking. Somebody found a typo. So the question, and this is an awfully good one, is with OE going live 11.1, what is your contingency between then and the 11.10 production date? The contingency is that this is a typo. That's actually supposed to have read 11.01, so apologies there. There we go. Good catch. So yeah, November 1st is the official launch. Absolutely, we understand that this thing is going to need to be working and working well as of November 1st. And by the way, I wanted to mention that the account creation process that's going to be starting next week when we send out the access forms, there is one and only one user account that is required for production access as well as any sandboxes associated with that environment. So we're only going to have to do that process once, and you'll have a single set of credentials that you can use to log in to both places. So we won't have to go through the account creation process twice. Again, no additional time lag as a result of user account creation between the sandbox rollout and then the official production rollout on 11.1. So that takes me to the end of the material that I had prepared for today. I know it's almost the end of the hour, but we do have a couple of minutes left. We are happy, as always, to entertain any questions regarding Carrier Connector or any other information that we provided during today's presentation. And again, you can jump in and submit a question by voice or submit a question by chat. And you're always welcome to email Eric if you'd prefer to do so offline. All right, sounds like we got quite a lot of people bailing, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and end today's meeting. We're very grateful, as always, for you to join us today, and if you have any follow-up questions, please send them to Eric Watt, and then I will send out an email to everyone who is on the invite list today with a link to the video and the presentation materials. Thanks, everyone. We'll be in touch very soon.